The autumn morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Jefferson Middle School in suburban Denver, casting long shadows across the hallways filled with the familiar sounds of another Tuesday. Students shuffled between classes, lockers slammed shut, and teachers prepared for the day ahead with the routine precision that defined American public education. In room 237, Cassandra Cass Blackwood arranged textbooks on her desk with the same methodical attention to detail that had once been applied to checking weapons and equipment in far more dangerous circumstances. At 34, she appeared to be exactly what she seemed, a dedicated 7th-grade history teacher who had found her calling in education. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and she wore a simple navy cardigan over dark slacks. Nothing about her appearance suggested the extraordinary skills hidden beneath this carefully constructed civilian identity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Cass had been teaching at Jefferson for 5 years, and in that time she had earned a reputation as one of the most effective educators in the district. Students respected her firm but fair approach to discipline. Parents appreciated her dedication to their children's success. Fellow teachers admired her ability to maintain perfect classroom control while fostering genuine learning. What none of them knew was that Sarah's classroom management skills had been honed in environments where failure meant death rather than poor test scores. As she wrote the day's lesson objectives on the whiteboard, her movements carried a subtle precision that careful observers might have found unusual. Each gesture was economical, purposeful, betraying muscle memory developed through years of training that most middle school teachers never received. She positioned herself with an unconscious awareness of entry and exit points, maintained sightlines that allowed her to monitor the entire room, and kept essential supplies within easy reach, habits that seemed like excellent teaching practices but served purposes beyond education. The first period bell rang, and 28 7th graders filed into her classroom with the typical energy of 12 and 13-year-olds facing another day of required learning. Among them was Marcus Washington, a quiet boy whose father had been deployed overseas for the past 8 months, and Emma Rodriguez, whose academic struggles masked a sharp intelligence that Cass had been carefully nurturing throughout the semester. These weren't just students to Cass. They were young people whose futures she had accepted responsibility for protecting, both academically and in ways they could never imagine. "Good morning, class," Cass said, her voice carrying the natural authority that made even the most disruptive students pay attention. "Today we're continuing our unit on World War II resistance movements. Can anyone tell me what we discussed yesterday about the French underground?" Hands shot up around the room, as students competed to share their knowledge about the brave men and women who had fought against occupation through guerrilla tactics, sabotage, and intelligence gathering. Cass listened to their answers with genuine engagement, though part of her mind automatically cataloged details about the school's security protocols, emergency procedures, and potential vulnerabilities that she noticed during her daily routines. What her students didn't know was that their teacher's expertise in resistance movements extended far beyond textbook knowledge. Cass had spent 8 years as a Navy SEAL participating in operations that would remain classified for decades. She had been part of elite teams that operated behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence, eliminating high-value targets, and conducting missions that existed only in the most restricted government files. Her understanding of tactics, strategy, and survival came from direct experience in some of the world's most dangerous locations. The transition from military service to civilian teaching hadn't been easy. After her final deployment ended 12 years ago, Cass had made the difficult decision to leave the Navy and create an entirely new identity. The reasons for this choice were complex, involving classified operations that had gone sideways, political pressures within the military hierarchy, and personal losses that had made continuing her military career impossible. She had used connections developed during her service to create a new background, complete with teaching credentials and a fabricated employment history that would satisfy even detailed background checks. Choosing education as her new profession hadn't been random. During her military service, Cass had often worked with local populations in conflict zones, teaching basic skills and helping communities rebuild after warfare. She had discovered an unexpected talent for connecting with young people and helping them develop confidence and resilience. teaching offered her a way to continue serving others while maintaining the low profile necessary for her safety and peace of mind. As the morning progressed through her various classes, Cass maintained the same professional demeanor that her colleagues had come to expect. She guided discussions about historical events with insight that impressed both students and visiting administrators. She mediated conflicts between students with diplomatic skills that prevented minor disagreements from escalating into major problems. She identified learning difficulties and adjusted her teaching methods to ensure that every student had opportunities for success. During her lunch break, Cass sat in the faculty lounge reading a book about educational psychology, while her colleagues discussed weekend plans and complained about administrative policies. She participated in these conversations when appropriate, but part of her attention remained focused on observing patterns in the school's daily routines. She noted which exterior doors remained unlocked during certain hours, how security cameras were positioned throughout the building, and which staff members had keys to restricted areas. This wasn't paranoia. It was the automatic situational awareness that had kept her alive during 8 years of special operations. Principal Robert Stevens had recruited Cass personally 5 years earlier, impressed by her interview responses and sterling references from her previous teaching position in Colorado Springs. What he particularly appreciated was her calm presence during crisis situations. When a student had suffered a severe allergic reaction during her second year at Jefferson, Cass had responded with medical knowledge and emergency management skills that had literally saved the child's life. When a domestic dispute had spilled onto school grounds the following year, Cass had de-escalated the situation with tactical communication techniques that prevented potential violence while protecting students and staff. These incidents had reinforced Cass's cover identity while demonstrating capabilities that went far beyond typical teacher training. Her colleagues attributed her exceptional crisis management skills to natural talent and excellent instincts. They had no way of knowing that her medical training included battlefield trauma care, or that her conflict resolution abilities had been developed through negotiations with hostile forces in war zones. The afternoon brought her favorite class, an advanced placement history group composed of 15 highly motivated 8th graders who had tested into accelerated curriculum. These students challenged her intellectually and reminded her why she had chosen teaching as her second career. Among them was David Chen, whose analytical mind and leadership qualities reminded Cass of young officers she had worked with during her military service, and Ashley Thompson, whose quiet determination and attention to detail suggested potential for excellence in whatever field she eventually chose. As Cass guided these advanced students through a complex discussion about the ethics of wartime decision-making, she found herself drawing on personal experiences that she could never share directly. Her insights into the psychological pressures faced by military commanders, the moral complexities of combat situations, and the long-term consequences of strategic choices added depth to the academic material that textbooks alone could never provide. Outside the classroom windows, the Colorado landscape stretched toward the Rocky Mountains, peaceful and serene under the afternoon sun. The suburban setting seemed far removed from the dangerous environments where Sarah had once operated, but she had learned never to assume that safety was guaranteed simply because of location or circumstances. Threats could emerge anywhere, at any time, often from directions that seemed impossible until they materialized. Her students worked diligently on group projects, discussing historical scenarios with the passion that Cass had carefully cultivated in them. They debated strategy, analyzed leadership decisions, and considered alternative outcomes with intellectual rigor that would prepare them well for high school and beyond. As she moved between groups, offering guidance and asking probing questions, Cass felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing she was making a genuine difference in young lives. What none of them could have imagined was that in less than 24 hours, the theoretical discussions about crisis response and tactical decision-making would become terrifyingly real. The peaceful suburban school that had been Cass's refuge for 5 years was about to become the center of a hostage situation that would test every skill she had acquired during her years as one of America's most elite warriors. But for now, on this ordinary Tuesday afternoon, room 237 remained a place of learning and growth, where a teacher who had once fought enemies of the state now fought ignorance and apathy with equal determination. The transformation from Navy SEAL to middle school educator was complete, or so everyone believed. Tomorrow would reveal just how quickly that carefully constructed civilian identity could be shattered when the stakes became high enough and innocent lives hung in the balance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Wednesday morning arrived with an unusual stillness that Cass noticed immediately upon entering Jefferson Middle School. The subtle shift in atmosphere wasn't something most people would detect, but 12 years of maintaining hypervigilance had trained her to recognize when normal patterns were disrupted. The custodial staff seemed more hurried than usual, maintenance workers were accessing areas they typically avoided during school hours, and two unfamiliar faces lingered near the main entrance with clipboards and official-looking badges. Cass moved through her morning routine with practiced normalcy while her mind cataloged these anomalies. During her military service, she had learned that successful operations often began with seemingly innocent reconnaissance, surveying target locations, identifying security weaknesses, and establishing patterns of behavior that could be exploited later. What appeared to be routine building inspection could easily mask something far more sinister. In the faculty lounge, her colleague Janet Morrison was complaining about the unexpected maintenance activity that had disrupted her classroom setup. They said something about updating the security system, Janet grumbled while preparing her morning coffee. But nobody told us we'd have strangers wandering the halls during class time. It's disruptive. Did they show proper identification? Cass asked casually, though her attention sharpened as she waited for the response. I assume so, Janet replied with a shrug. Principal Stevens must have approved it. He's usually pretty careful about these things. Cass made a mental note to verify the maintenance request through official channels. During her SEAL training, she had learned that institutional assumptions about security protocols often created the very vulnerabilities that hostile forces exploited. People assumed that because someone wore the right uniform or carried official-looking documentation, they belonged in restricted areas. Her first period class proceeded normally, but Cass found herself unconsciously positioning herself with better sightlines to the classroom door and windows. The students seemed oblivious to any tension, focused on their group presentations about World War II resistance movements. As Marcus Washington delivered his report on the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Cass noted how the young man's natural leadership qualities emerged when discussing historical examples of courage under impossible circumstances. During the brief break between classes, Cass stepped into the hallway and observed the maintenance workers more carefully. Their equipment appeared authentic, but something about their movements suggested military training rather than civilian technical work. They maintained formation spacing that seemed excessive for routine repairs, and their situational awareness exceeded what she would expect from ordinary contractors. Excuse me, she approached the team leader, a tall man with graying hair who carried himself with unmistakable command presence. I'm Cassandra Blackwood, one of the teachers here. I noticed you're working on our security systems. Is there anything we should be aware of for classroom safety? The man studied her with eyes that seemed to assess more than her question warranted. Just routine upgrades, ma'am. Federal requirements for school security infrastructure. Nothing that should affect normal operations. His answer was reasonable, but his demeanor triggered recognition signals that Cass had hoped never to encounter again. This was someone accustomed to giving orders in high-stakes situations, not a civilian contractor performing maintenance work. The way he held his shoulders, the automatic scan of potential threats, the precise economical language, these were markers of special operations background. I appreciate you keeping disruption to a minimum, Cass replied, maintaining her teacher persona while making her own assessment. Our students have important testing coming up. As she returned to her classroom, Cass's mind raced through possibilities. If her suspicions were correct, Jefferson Middle School was being surveyed by individuals with advanced tactical training. The question was whether they represented legitimate security enhancement or something far more dangerous. Her years underground had taught her that sometimes the most effective way to hide hostile intentions was to masquerade as official authority. The morning progressed with increasing tension that only Cass seemed to detect. During her planning period, she discreetly accessed the school's administrative system to verify the maintenance authorization. What she found confirmed her growing concerns. No official work orders had been filed for security system upgrades, and the contractor information listed in the temporary access log didn't match any of the district's approved vendors. Rather than immediately alerting Principal Stevens, Cass decided to gather more intelligence before potentially compromising her own position. If this was indeed a reconnaissance operation for something larger, premature exposure could escalate the timeline and put students at greater risk. Her SEAL training had emphasized the importance of understanding the full scope of a threat before taking action. At lunch, she positioned herself in the faculty lounge where she could monitor conversations while appearing to grade papers. The maintenance team had expanded their presence throughout the building, accessing computer servers, electrical panels, and communication systems with the thoroughness that suggested they were mapping the entire infrastructure. Other teachers seemed accepting of the disruption, trusting in administrative oversight that might not actually exist. Cass's advanced students arrived for 6th period with their usual enthusiasm for challenging discussions. Today's topic was the psychology of resistance movements, how ordinary people found courage to oppose overwhelming force when their fundamental values were threatened. As she guided the conversation, Cass found herself drawing parallels between historical examples and contemporary situations in ways that took on new urgency given her morning observations. Can anyone think of modern examples where people had to choose between personal safety and protecting others? She asked the class. David Chen raised his hand immediately. What about teachers during school shootings? They have to decide whether to follow lockdown procedures or risk their lives to help students. The question hit closer to home than David could have known. Cass had spent considerable time studying active shooter scenarios during her transition to civilian life, understanding that schools represented potential targets for various types of attacks. Her classroom emergency plans went far beyond district requirements, incorporating tactical considerations that would never appear in official protocols. That's an excellent example, David, Cass replied. In crisis situations, people often discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. Training and preparation matter, but so does the willingness to act when others depend on you. Ashley Thompson, always thoughtful in her contributions, added, "But how do you know when you're trained enough to help instead of making things worse? Sometimes trying to be a hero can cause more problems." The question demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that impressed Cass about this particular group of students. You're right to consider that, Ashley. Effective action requires understanding your capabilities, assessing the situation accurately, and accepting responsibility for the consequences of both action and inaction. As the class continued their discussion, Cass noticed unusual activity in the hallway outside her classroom windows. The maintenance team was installing equipment near the main entrance that looked far more sophisticated than typical security upgrades. The devices appeared to be communication jammers or electronic surveillance systems, technology that exceeded anything a middle school would require for normal security purposes. The final bell of the day rang, and students gathered their materials with the usual mixture of relief and anticipation for after-school activities. As they filed out of room 237, Cass made a decision that would have seemed paranoid to her colleagues but felt absolutely necessary given her growing concerns. Marcus, Emma, David, Ashley, she called to her most trusted students. "Could you stay for a few minutes? I want to discuss your progress on the semester project." The 4 students exchanged glances but settled back into their seats without complaint. Once the hallway had cleared and she was certain they wouldn't be overheard, Cass closed the classroom door and activated the white noise machine she used during confidential student conferences. "I need to ask you all a serious question," she began, her tone shifting from casual teacher to something more authoritative. "Have any of you noticed anything unusual about the maintenance work happening in the school today?" The students looked confused by the question, but David Chen's analytical mind immediately engaged with the problem. "Now that you mention it, those guys seemed really intense for people just fixing security cameras. And they were wearing military-style boots under their coveralls." Emma Rodriguez, despite her academic struggles, had sharp observational skills that Cass had always admired. They were talking to each other with hand signals sometimes. "My uncle's in the Army, and he does that stuff when he doesn't want people to hear what he's saying." Marcus Washington nodded slowly. "And they knew exactly where to find everything without asking for directions, like they'd studied the building layout before they got here." Ashley Thompson, ever cautious, asked the question that Cass had been hoping someone would raise. "Ms. Blackwood, are you worried that something bad is going to happen?" Cass looked at the 4 young people who had unknowingly stumbled into a situation that could become extremely dangerous. These weren't just students anymore. They were potential witnesses to a reconnaissance operation that might be preparation for something catastrophic. Her duty to protect them was absolute, but doing so effectively would require revealing capabilities that could compromise the identity she had spent 12 years building. "I'm not certain yet," she answered honestly, "but I want you all to be extra careful tomorrow. If anything seems wrong, if there's any kind of emergency or unusual situation, I want you to remember that your safety is more important than following normal rules. Do you understand?" The gravity in her voice convinced them that this wasn't a typical teacher-student conversation. They nodded solemnly, sensing that their trusted educator was trying to prepare them for something serious without being able to explain exactly what. As the students gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Cass made another decision that would either prove to be unnecessary caution or the most important choice of her civilian career. She walked to her desk and quietly opened a locked drawer where she kept emergency supplies that no other teacher in the building would have thought to maintain. Hidden among seemingly innocent school supplies were items that spoke to her true background: military-grade first aid equipment, emergency communications devices, and defensive tools that could be explained as classroom safety measures to anyone who didn't recognize their actual purpose. Tomorrow would reveal whether 12 years of peaceful teaching had been merely an interlude before returning to the kind of dangerous situations that had once defined her life. As she prepared to leave Jefferson Middle School on what might be the last normal day of her civilian career, Cass Blackwood began the mental transition from educator back to warrior. The recognition was both terrifying and strangely familiar. Some skills, once learned, never truly faded. They simply waited in the shadows until circumstances demanded their return. Thursday morning broke gray and overcast, with storm clouds gathering over the Colorado foothills that matched the tension Cass felt building in her chest. She arrived at Jefferson Middle School 45 minutes earlier than usual, using her teacher key card to access the building through the staff entrance, while most areas remained empty and unmonitored. The overnight hours had given her time to make discreet inquiries through encrypted channels she hadn't accessed in years. The responses she received confirmed her worst fears. The maintenance team wasn't listed in any legitimate contractor database, and their equipment signatures matched surveillance technology typically used in hostile intelligence operations. More disturbing, facial recognition analysis of photographs she had carefully taken suggested at least 2 team members had connections to international mercenary organizations. Moving through the darkened hallways with the silent efficiency that came from years of infiltration training, Cass conducted her own reconnaissance of the modifications made to the school's infrastructure. What she discovered made her stomach tighten with professional dread. The security upgrades included communication jamming equipment, electronic surveillance nodes, and what appeared to be remotely triggered locking mechanisms on critical exit routes. This wasn't preparation for a robbery or vandalism. It was the systematic conversion of Jefferson Middle School into a containment facility. Someone was planning to trap the building's occupants and control all communication with the outside world. The only question was why, and when the operation would begin. Cass retreated to her classroom and activated the secure communication device she had hoped never to use again. After 12 years of silence, she was about to break protocol and contact the one person who might be able to provide official assistance without compromising her carefully constructed identity. "Blackwood to Shepard," she whispered into the encrypted transmitter, using call signs that hadn't been spoken in over a decade. The response came after a long pause, filled with disbelief and concern. "Blackwood? Jesus Christ, Cass, where the hell have you been? We declared you KIA after the Kazakhstan extraction went sideways." Commander Jake Shepard Morrison had been her team leader during the final 2 years of her SEAL service. He was one of only 3 people who knew the real circumstances of her disappearance and the threats that had forced her underground. If anyone could provide rapid response support, it would be Jake. "I've been teaching middle school in Denver," she replied, the absurdity of the statement not lost on either of them. "But I think my location has been compromised. There's a hostile team conducting surveillance and infrastructure modification at my school. They're preparing for something big." "Infrastructure modification?" Jake's voice carried the sharp focus that indicated he was transitioning into operational mode. "What kind of modifications?" Cass described the surveillance equipment, communication jammers, and exit controls that had been installed under the guise of security upgrades. As she provided tactical details, she could hear Jake coordinating with others in the background, the familiar sounds of a Special Operations Command Center mobilizing for crisis response. Cass, we've been tracking increased chatter about a high-profile kidnapping operation targeting American civilians. Intelligence suggests it's being planned by a coalition of hostile actors who want to create a negotiation scenario with maximum media impact. A middle school would fit that profile perfectly. The confirmation of her fears sent a chill through Cass that had nothing to do with the morning cold. What's the target? Are they after specific students, or is this about creating a general hostage situation? Unknown at this time. But if they've identified you as a former SEAL, the operation might be specifically designed to exploit your presence. Having a legendary special operator trapped in the same building as civilian hostages would create incredible psychological pressure for any rescue attempt. Cass understood immediately. Her reputation during active service had been built on successful hostage extractions and impossible rescue missions. If hostile forces had somehow discovered her true identity, they could be planning to use her protective instincts against her, creating a situation where her attempts to save students would be anticipated and countered. "I need immediate backup," she said, checking her watch and noting that staff members would begin arriving within the hour, but it has to be completely invisible. If they realize we're aware of their operation, they might accelerate the timeline. "Negative, Blackwood. I'm ordering you to evacuate immediately. Get out of the building and let us handle this with proper tactical teams." For a moment, Cass was tempted to follow orders and retreat to safety. 12 years of civilian life had given her an appreciation for normal existence that she had never possessed during her military career. She had built meaningful relationships with students and colleagues who depended on her in ways that went beyond tactical operations. But even as she considered escape, she knew it was impossible. 700 students would arrive at Jefferson Middle School in less than 2 hours. If hostile forces were indeed planning a mass kidnapping operation, those children would become pawns in a game that could last days or weeks. Her presence might complicate the situation, but her absence would certainly make it worse. "Negative, Shepard. I can't abandon my students. These kids have become my responsibility, and some of them don't have anyone else who will fight for them." Jake's voice carried the frustration of someone who understood her reasoning but disagreed with her decision. "Damn it, Cass. You've been out of the game for 12 years. You don't have backup, you don't have proper equipment, and you're facing an unknown number of hostiles with advanced planning and preparation." "I've been training every day for 12 years, she replied quietly, "just not in ways that appeared on any official records. I may be a teacher now, but I never stopped being a SEAL." Before Jake could respond, the sound of vehicles arriving in the school parking lot cut through the early morning silence. Cass moved to her classroom window and observed 3 additional vans pulling up to strategic positions around the building. The occupants who emerged moved with military precision, wearing custodial uniforms that didn't quite disguise their tactical bearing. "They're here," she whispered into the transmitter. "Multiple teams, professional deployment. This is happening now. Cass, get out of there immediately. We can have tactical teams on site in 40 minutes. 40 minutes is too long. Students start arriving in an hour, and once they're inside, evacuation becomes impossible." Cass moved away from the window and began accessing the emergency supplies she had hidden in her classroom. "I'm going to try to delay their operation until your teams arrive." "How do you plan to delay a professional kidnapping team by yourself?" Cass smiled grimly as she retrieved items that would have seemed innocent to anyone who didn't recognize their tactical applications. "By reminding them why they used to call me the Ghost of Kandahar." Her SEAL nickname had been earned during a series of operations where she had single-handedly disrupted enemy positions through psychological warfare, sabotage, and strategic elimination of key targets. The techniques that had made her legendary in Afghanistan could be adapted to a civilian environment, though doing so would require her to embrace skills she had hoped never to use again. "Shepard, I need you to coordinate with local law enforcement to establish a perimeter and prevent civilian access to the school, but don't let them charge in with sirens blazing. These operatives will execute their hostage plan the moment they feel threatened by official response." "Understood, but Cass, promise me you won't try to take them on directly. Your job is to gather intelligence and delay, not to single-handedly fight a terrorist cell." Before she could respond, the school's PA system crackled to life with an announcement that chilled her blood. Principal Stevens's voice, but with an underlying tension that suggested he was speaking under duress. "Attention all staff members. Please report to the main auditorium immediately for an emergency security briefing. This is mandatory for all personnel currently in the building. Cass knew immediately that Stevens had been compromised and was being forced to gather school employees in a centralized location where they could be controlled. The operation had begun earlier than expected, which meant students would arrive to find their school already under hostile control. "The operation just went active," she whispered into the transmitter. "They're rounding up staff members now. Students will walk into a trap in less than an hour." Jake's voice carried the urgency of someone coordinating a crisis response. "We're scrambling tactical teams from 3 different bases. But you need to stay hidden and avoid contact until we arrive." Cass looked around her classroom, the space where she had spent 5 years nurturing young minds and building a life based on education rather than violence. In a few hours, this peaceful environment would become a battlefield where her students' lives would depend on skills she had acquired in some of the world's most dangerous places. "Negative, Shepard. I'm not hiding while my kids walk into danger. I'm going to make sure they have someone protecting them who understands what we're really fighting." She switched off the transmitter before Jake could object, then began the transformation from Cassandra Blackwood, middle school teacher, back to the operator who had once been considered one of America's most effective special warfare assets. The ghost of Kandahar was about to emerge from 12 years of retirement, and the hostile forces occupying Jefferson Middle School were about to discover that some legends were based on terrifying reality. Cass moved through Jefferson Middle School's corridors like a shadow, utilizing maintenance passages and blind spots she had mapped during 5 years of unconscious tactical planning. The hostile operatives had made a critical error in their timing. By moving to control the building before all staff members had arrived, they had created gaps in their surveillance that someone with her training could exploit. From her concealed position in the ventilation access above the main auditorium, she observed the scene that confirmed her worst fears. 12 faculty members sat in folding chairs, their hands zip-tied behind their backs, while 4 armed men in tactical gear stood guard. Principal Stevens was being held separately, a gun to his head as he was forced to rehearse announcements that would be used to control students when they arrived. The leader of the operation was a man Cass recognized from intelligence files she had studied years ago, Viktor Kozlov, a former Spetsnaz operative turned mercenary who specialized in high-profile kidnapping operations. His presence meant this wasn't a random school shooting or domestic terrorism. It was a professionally planned international incident with objectives that extended far beyond the building itself. Through her concealed earpiece, she could hear fragments of Kozlov's conversation with his team leaders. They were discussing the primary asset and maximizing leverage potential language that suggested they knew exactly who she was and had planned this operation specifically to exploit her presence at the school. Cass retreated from the auditorium and made her way to the school's communications center, where she found 2 more operatives installing sophisticated jamming equipment that would prevent cell phone signals and block internet access. She watched from the shadows as they tested systems designed to control every electronic device in the building, from security cameras to fire alarms to automatic door locks. The tactical picture was becoming clear. Kozlov's team planned to seal the building once students arrived, creating a contained environment where they could select specific hostages while preventing any communication with the outside world. The media attention from a mass school hostage situation would provide cover for their real objective, extracting high-value targets who could be used for political or financial leverage. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that Cassandra Blackwood, the mild-mannered history teacher, would be as helpless as any other civilian trapped in their operation. They had no idea that she had spent the past 12 years preparing for exactly this type of scenario, developing contingency plans that would allow her to operate within her own school as if it were enemy territory. Moving to her classroom through service corridors, Cass accessed hidden compartments she had built into seemingly innocent storage areas. What she retrieved would have shocked her colleagues: military-grade communications equipment, tactical medical supplies, and defensive weapons that could be explained as educational materials or safety equipment to anyone who didn't recognize their true purpose. The modified tablet computer she activated contained detailed floor plans of Jefferson Middle School, complete with entry and exit routes, defensive positions, and tactical considerations she had developed during years of unconscious mission planning. What had seemed like excessive caution during peaceful times now represented the difference between organized resistance and helpless victimization. Through her secure link to Commander Morrison's tactical center, she transmitted real-time intelligence about the hostile force composition and objectives. The response came back within minutes. Official rescue teams were mobilizing, but the political sensitivity of the situation was complicating response authorization. "Blackwood, we're reading 12 hostiles with professional equipment and coordination," Jake's voice came through her earpiece. "This has international implications that are being debated at the highest levels. You may be on your own for longer than anticipated." Cass checked her watch. Students would begin arriving in 23 minutes. Once the building filled with children, Kozlov's team would have all the leverage they needed to control the situation indefinitely. Her window for effective action was rapidly closing. She made a decision that would have been impossible for any civilian educator, but felt natural for someone who had spent 8 years conducting operations behind enemy lines. Rather than waiting for official rescue that might come too late, she would begin systematic disruption of the hostile operation, not through direct confrontation, but through the psychological warfare techniques that had earned her legendary status in Afghanistan. The first target was the communication jamming equipment. Cass approached the operators through blind spots they hadn't considered, moving with the silent efficiency that had once allowed her to infiltrate heavily fortified enemy positions. The two men monitoring the electronic systems never saw her coming. Using pressure point techniques that rendered them unconscious without permanent damage, she neutralized both operators and began reverse engineering their jamming systems. Within minutes, she had created selective communication windows that would allow her to coordinate with outside forces while maintaining the appearance that their systems remained operational. Her second objective was more complex: psychological disruption of the hostile team's confidence and coordination. Kozlov's operation depended on maintaining strict control over timing and communication. If his team began experiencing unexplained equipment failures and communication breakdowns, their professional coordination would deteriorate rapidly. Moving through the school's infrastructure like a ghost, Cass began implementing sabotage techniques she hadn't used in 12 years. Security cameras were redirected to show empty corridors while she moved through them. Motion sensors were disabled in strategic locations. Emergency lighting systems were modified to respond to her remote control rather than automated triggers. Each modification was subtle enough to be attributed to equipment malfunction, but collectively they would create an environment where Kozlov's team couldn't trust their own technology. In special operations, uncertainty was often more effective than direct confrontation. Confused enemies made tactical errors that could be exploited by prepared defenders. As she worked, Cass monitored radio communications between the hostile team members. Their confidence was already beginning to erode as small technical problems accumulated without obvious explanations. Kozlov himself was becoming increasingly frustrated with status reports that didn't match his operational expectations. "Base team, confirm communication array status." His voice crackled through intercepted radio traffic. "All systems show green, but we're getting intermittent signal drops on sectors 3 and 7, came the confused response. "Identify and correct immediately. We cannot afford technical failures when the primary phase begins." Cass smiled grimly as she listened to their growing confusion. The Ghost of Kandahar had always preferred psychological pressure to direct assault. Enemies who doubted their own capabilities were already halfway to defeat. Her final preparation involved positioning emergency supplies and communication equipment at strategic locations throughout the school. If the situation deteriorated into extended hostage negotiations, she needed resources that would allow her to operate independently while protecting as many students as possible. The irony wasn't lost on her that the emergency protocols she had developed as a safety-conscious teacher now served as tactical preparations for asymmetric warfare. Every evacuation route she had memorized, every hiding place she had identified, every emergency supply cache she had established, all of it was about to be tested under the most extreme circumstances possible. Through her classroom window, she could see the first school buses approaching Jefferson Middle School in the distance. 700 students were about to walk into a situation that could define the rest of their lives. In less than 15 minutes, Kozlov's team would begin the next phase of their operation, transforming a place of learning into a battlefield. But they would discover that their carefully planned hostage operation faced an opponent they hadn't anticipated, someone who understood their methods better than they understood hers, and who had spent 12 years preparing for this exact moment. As the buses drew closer, Cass Blackwood completed her transformation from teacher to guardian. The skills that had once protected American interests in foreign conflicts were about to be deployed in defense of the children who had become her most important mission. The students of Jefferson Middle School were about to learn that their history teacher was prepared to make history herself, and that some lessons could only be taught through actions that spoke louder than any textbook. The first wave of students entered Jefferson Middle School at exactly 7:47 a.m., their morning chatter and laughter creating a stark contrast to the deadly trap that awaited them. Cass watched from her concealed position as Viktor Kozlov's team executed their plan with military precision, allowing the children to proceed to their lockers and first-period classes before sealing the building and revealing their presence. From her hidden vantage point in the maintenance corridor above the main hallway, Cass observed the moment when normalcy shattered. At 8:15 a.m., as students settled into their first-period classrooms, the school's PA system crackled with Viktor Kozlov's heavily accented voice. Students and staff of Jefferson Middle School, remain calm and listen carefully. This building is now under our control. All exterior doors have been sealed, and all communication with the outside world has been blocked. Anyone who attempts to leave or contact authorities will be shot immediately. The reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Cass could hear screams echoing from classrooms throughout the building as 7th and 8th graders tried to comprehend a situation that exceeded their worst nightmares. Teachers struggled to maintain control while dealing with their own terror, and the sound of crying children filled corridors that had been filled with laughter moments before. But Kozlov wasn't finished with his psychological assault. "We know that among you is someone very special, a former American military operative who has been hiding among you as a teacher. Cassandra Blackwood, you have exactly 10 minutes to surrender yourself in the main auditorium, or we will begin executing students at random intervals." The announcement sent ice through Cass's veins. Not only had they confirmed her identity, but they were using her students as leverage to force her surrender. This wasn't just a hostage situation. It was a personal trap designed specifically to exploit her protective instincts and tactical capabilities. Through her earpiece, Commander Morrison's voice crackled with urgency. "Blackwood, do not comply with their demands. We have teams mobilizing, but we need more time to establish tactical positions." "How much time?" Cass whispered, watching through security monitors as armed operatives moved through the hallways, establishing control zones and identifying key hostages. "Minimum 45 minutes for tactical entry, possibly longer if they have sophisticated countermeasures." Cass checked her watch. She had less than 7 minutes before Kozlov's deadline expired. In her mind, she could see the faces of every student in the building, children who had trusted her to keep them safe and who were now being used as weapons against her. But surrendering herself would only give Kozlov exactly what he wanted, a high-value hostage whose capture would provide maximum leverage against American authorities. Her training told her that compliance would likely result in the deaths of both herself and many students, as terrorists rarely honored agreements once they achieved their primary objectives. Instead, she activated a plan she had hoped never to implement, the emergency protocols she had developed for protecting her students during extreme crisis situations. Over the past 5 years, she had subtly trained her most trusted students in emergency procedures that went far beyond standard school safety drills. Using the school's modified communication system, she sent coded messages to 4 specific classrooms where Marcus Washington, Emma Rodriguez, David Chen, and Ashley Thompson were located. The messages appeared to be routine administrative announcements, but contained phrases that would trigger emergency protocols she had taught them during seemingly innocent classroom discussions. "Attention students in rooms 142, 167, 203, and 237. Please implement the advanced fire safety procedures we discussed during yesterday's lesson review. Move quietly to your designated safe zones and maintain complete silence until further notice." To anyone listening, it sounded like a standard safety announcement. But her 4 trusted students would recognize the coded language and understand that they needed to activate emergency plans that included securing their classrooms, protecting other students, and establishing communication with designated safe zones. Cass moved through the building's infrastructure toward her first tactical objective, the school's central control room where Kozlov's team was coordinating their operation. She had spent years studying the building's layout and had identified vulnerable points in their security perimeter that even professional operatives might overlook. As she moved, her earpiece crackled with updates from the tactical center. Blackwood, we're reading elevated stress indicators from multiple students. Are you in position to provide direct protection? Negative. Direct intervention would compromise operational security and likely result in mass casualties. I'm implementing distributed protection protocols. What she meant was that rather than trying to single-handedly fight 12 armed operatives in direct confrontation, she was using techniques designed to fragment their coordination, protect key groups of students, and create opportunities for tactical rescue teams to succeed. Her first target was the communication relay that Kozlov's team was using to coordinate between their various positions throughout the school. By introducing subtle interference into their radio frequencies, she could create confusion that would make their responses less coordinated and more predictable. Moving through ceiling spaces with the silent efficiency that had once allowed her to infiltrate enemy command posts, Cass reached the central control room where 3 operatives were monitoring security feeds and coordinating team movements. Through her concealed position, she could observe their tactical displays and understand exactly how they planned to control the building. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't just a hostage situation, but a carefully planned media event designed to maximize international attention. They had professional camera equipment ready to broadcast selected footage, and their tactical positions were designed not just for control, but for creating dramatic footage that would spread across social media platforms. The political implications were staggering. By capturing a legendary American special operator along with hundreds of innocent children, Kozlov's team could create a propaganda victory that would resonate globally, while providing enormous leverage for whatever political or financial demands they planned to make. But they had made one critical miscalculation in their planning. They assumed that Cass would respond to their threats like a civilian teacher, rather than the tactical operator she remained. Instead of surrendering to save her students, she was implementing countermeasures that would systematically dismantle their operational capabilities. Through her secure link, she transmitted detailed intelligence about enemy positions, equipment, and tactical plans to the response teams mobilizing outside the building. Every piece of information would help official rescue efforts succeed with minimal casualties when they finally received authorization to proceed. As Kozlov's 10-minute deadline approached, Cass could hear increasing agitation in his voice over the intercepted radio communications. Status report on the target. Has Blackwood been located? Negative, sir. All classrooms have been secured, but we haven't identified her among the captured personnel. Impossible. She must be hiding somewhere in the building. Implement Search Protocol Delta, room-by-room sweep of all areas not currently under direct observation. Cass smiled grimly as she listened to their confusion. The Ghost of Kandahar had always been most effective when enemies couldn't predict her location or intentions. By remaining invisible while systematically undermining their operation, she was forcing them to react to threats they couldn't identify or counter. The deadline passed without her surrender, and Kozlov's frustrated voice echoed through the school's PA system. Cassandra Blackwood, you have chosen to prioritize your own safety over the lives of innocent children. We will now demonstrate the consequences of your cowardice. Through the security monitors, Cass watched as armed operatives began moving toward classrooms where students were being held. Her heart pounded as she realized that Kozlov was about to make good on his threat to execute hostages, a development that would transform the situation from a complex negotiation into an active rescue scenario. But she was ready for this escalation. The past hour had been spent not just gathering intelligence, but positioning herself for the moment when defensive action became absolutely necessary. Her students were about to discover that their history teacher had prepared for this exact moment, and that some lessons could only be taught through actions that demonstrated the true meaning of courage and sacrifice. The Ghost of Kandahar was about to emerge from the shadows, and Viktor Kozlov's carefully planned operation was about to encounter resistance he never expected from someone he thought he understood. The moment Viktor Kozlov's operatives began moving towards student-occupied classrooms with lethal intent, Cassandra Blackwood made the transition from hidden observer to active combatant. 12 years of peaceful teaching dissolved in an instant, as muscle memory and tactical instincts honed in the world's most dangerous conflicts took control. Her first target was the 2-man team approaching room 142, where Marcus Washington and 26 other 7th graders were trapped with their terrified math teacher. The operatives moved with professional confidence, expecting to encounter only civilian resistance as they prepared to make good on Kozlov's threat to execute hostages. They never saw her coming. Cass dropped through a ceiling access panel behind the lead operative with the silent efficiency that had once made her legendary among Special Forces units. Before either man could react, she had disabled the first with a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds, while simultaneously disarming the second with a combination of pressure points and leverage techniques that left him helpless on the floor. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds and produced no sound that would alert other members of Kozlov's team. To the students inside room 142, their rescue appeared like magic. Suddenly, the armed men threatening them were unconscious on the floor, and a familiar voice was speaking softly through the door. "Marcus, this is Miss Blackwood. Are you and your classmates safe?" "Ms. Blackwood?" Marcus's voice carried disbelief and desperate hope. "We thought you were. How did you—" "That's not important right now. I need you to implement the emergency protocol we discussed yesterday. Move everyone to the designated safe zone and maintain complete silence. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, ma'am. But there are more of them in the hallway." "I'll handle the hallway. Your job is to protect your classmates. Remember everything we talked about during our history discussions about leadership under pressure. You're in charge now." The confidence in her voice transformed Marcus from a terrified child into a determined protector. Through the door, she could hear him organizing his classmates with the kind of calm authority that would have made any military commander proud. Cass secured the unconscious operatives with their own zip-tie restraints, then collected their weapons and communication equipment. The captured radios would allow her to monitor Kozlov's communications and potentially feed false information to disrupt his coordination. Moving through the building's infrastructure like a ghost, she approached her second objective, the team threatening room 167, where Emma Rodriguez was trapped with her science class. This engagement required a different approach, as the operatives were positioned where direct assault would create too much noise and potentially alert other teams. Instead, she implemented one of the psychological warfare techniques that had made her legendary in Afghanistan. Using the captured radio equipment, she began broadcasting subtle audio interference on Kozlov's communication frequencies, sounds that could be attributed to equipment malfunction, but would gradually erode his team's confidence in their technology. Team 3, report status. Kozlov's voice crackled through the radio. Team 3, experiencing communication, static interference. Came the confused response from the operatives approaching Emma's classroom. While they struggled with their compromised communications, Cass used the distraction to position herself for a flanking attack that would neutralize both operatives before they could threaten students. The engagement was swift and decisive. 2 more unconscious hostiles, 2 more classrooms secured, and still no general alarm raised among Kozlov's remaining forces. But her tactical success was creating an unintended consequence. As teams failed to report in and radio communications became increasingly unreliable, Kozlov was beginning to realize that his carefully planned operation was being systematically dismantled by an opponent who understood his methods better than he understood theirs. All teams switched to backup communication frequency. His voice carried increasing frustration. "We have technical difficulties that may indicate hostile interference. Implement Countermeasure Protocol 7 immediately." Through her earpiece, Commander Morrison's voice provided updates from the Tactical Command Center. "Blackwood, we're monitoring their radio traffic. They're starting to realize they're under attack. Are you prepared for escalated response?" "Affirmative." 4 teams neutralized. Approximately 8 hostiles remaining. They're about to abandon subtle control in favor of direct confrontation. "We're showing movement of official response teams toward your perimeter, but political authorization is still pending. Can you maintain current operations until tactical support arrives?" Cass checked her watch while monitoring security feeds that showed Kozlov's remaining operatives abandoning their distributed positions to form defensive clusters around high-value targets. The change in tactics meant her ghost-like operations would become increasingly difficult, but it also created opportunities for more direct action. Negative on maintaining current operations, they're consolidating around critical positions, which means I need to shift from stealth to assault tactics. The transition represented a fundamental change in her approach. Instead of picking off isolated operatives through stealth, She would need to engage multiple hostiles simultaneously while protecting civilian populations. It was the kind of high-risk operation that had made her reputation during active service. Impossible odds, innocent lives at stake, and no backup except her own skills and determination. Her primary concern was the main auditorium where faculty members were still being held hostage. Kozlov himself was positioned there with his most experienced operatives, using the captured teachers as human shields while coordinating what remained of his operation. But first, she needed to secure her most trusted students, David Chen and Ashley Thompson, who were in different areas of the building and could provide crucial assistance if she could reach them safely. Moving toward room 203, where David's advanced math class was located, Cass encountered her first organized resistance. 3 operatives had established a defensive position in the main hallway, using portable barriers and coordinated fields of fire to control movement through the corridor. This was the kind of tactical challenge that separated elite operators from ordinary soldiers. Direct assault would likely result in student casualties, while leaving the position intact would prevent her from reaching other threatened areas of the building. She solved the problem using a technique that had earned her commendations during urban warfare operations in the Middle East. Rather than attacking the position directly, she created multiple distractions that forced the operatives to divide their attention while she maneuvered to attack their blind spots. First, she triggered fire alarms in 3 different areas of the school simultaneously, creating audio confusion that masked her movement. Then she used the building's ventilation system to introduce smoke that obscured visibility in their defensive position. Finally, she employed her captured radio equipment to broadcast false reports that suggested additional American operatives were entering the building from multiple directions. The combination of sensory overload and tactical confusion caused the 3 operatives to make critical errors in their positioning. Cass exploited these mistakes with the precision that had once made her legendary among special operations units. The engagement was fierce, but brief. Within minutes, 3 more hostiles were neutralized, and she had secured access to David Chen's classroom. But the noise and smoke had finally alerted Kozlov to the fact that he was facing serious resistance. "All teams, we are under attack by professional opposition." His voice carried the sharp edge of someone realizing his operation was failing. "Abandon dispersed positions and consolidate around primary objective points. Implement execution protocol if anyone attempts to prevent consolidation." Through the security monitors, Cass watched as Kozlov's remaining operatives began moving captured faculty members from the auditorium toward what appeared to be predetermined positions throughout the building. They were transitioning from a hostage negotiation scenario to a last-stand defensive situation that would be far more dangerous for everyone involved. But they had made one final miscalculation. They assumed that their opposition was an official rescue team following standard tactical procedures. They had no way of knowing that they were facing a single operator who understood their psychology better than they understood their own, and who was prepared to implement solutions that no official rescue team would be authorized to attempt. The Ghost of Kandahar was about to demonstrate why legends were sometimes based on terrifying reality. Victor Kozlov's voice echoed through Jefferson Middle School's PA system with the controlled fury of a professional who saw his operation collapsing around him. "Cassandra Blackwood, you have made a grave tactical error. We now hold 43 hostages in 4 separate locations. Any further interference will result in immediate executions." From her position in the central corridor, Cass monitored security feeds that showed the devastating change in Kozlov's strategy. His remaining 6 operatives had abandoned their original plan and were now using captured faculty and staff as human shields while establishing kill zones that would make any rescue attempt catastrophically expensive. Principal Stevens was being held in the main office with 2 operatives and 8 faculty members. The school librarian and 4 staff members were trapped in the cafeteria with 2 more hostiles. Most critically, Kozlov himself had taken position in the school's emergency shelter area, with the remaining 2 operatives and the largest group of hostages, including the school nurse, guidance counselors, and custodial staff who had been captured during the initial takeover. Through her secure communication link, Commander Morrison's voice carried the tension of someone coordinating a crisis with international implications. "Blackwood, we have tactical teams in position outside the building, but the hostage distribution makes standard breach protocols impossible. Political authorization is being debated at the cabinet level." "How long for official response?" Cass whispered, studying the tactical displays that showed how Kozlov had transformed the school into a fortress designed to maximize casualties for any conventional rescue attempt. Unknown, this has become an international incident with media coverage and potential diplomatic consequences. They want guarantees of zero civilian casualties before authorizing tactical entry. Cass understood the political complexity, but she also understood that Kozlov's psychological profile suggested he would begin executing hostages within the hour, regardless of official response timelines. His operation had failed to achieve its primary objectives, and men with his background often chose to maximize damage rather than accept defeat. Morrison, I need you to coordinate media blackout and establish communication protocols with Kozlov. Make him believe that official negotiations are beginning and that I've been identified and contained. What are you planning, Cass? Something that won't appear in any official reports, she replied grimly. Kozlov expects either surrender or a conventional tactical response. I'm going to give him something he's never encountered before. The plan that formed in her mind would have been impossible for any official rescue team to implement, but it built on capabilities she had developed during the most classified operations of her SEAL career. Instead of trying to simultaneously assault 4 separate hostage locations, she would use psychological warfare to force Kozlov to consolidate his forces into a single engagement where her advantages could be maximized. Moving through the building's infrastructure to the central communication control room, Cass began implementing a deception operation that required her to become multiple people simultaneously. Using voice modulation equipment she had hidden among her emergency supplies, she created fake radio traffic that suggested multiple American special operations teams were coordinating complex assault plans against all 4 hostage locations. Alpha Team, confirm breach positions for main office assault. She broadcast on frequencies she knew Kozlov would be monitoring. Bravo Team in position for cafeteria entry awaiting synchronized go signal. Charlie Team requests confirmation of sniper overwatch for emergency shelter approach. The fake communications were designed to convince Kozlov that he was facing imminent assault from multiple directions by overwhelming force. His psychological profile suggested he would respond by consolidating his hostages into the most defensible position available, exactly what Cass needed him to do. The deception worked faster than she had anticipated. Within 20 minutes, security monitors showed operatives abandoning their distributed positions and moving all hostages toward the emergency shelter area where Kozlov had established his command position. The consolidation created exactly the tactical situation she needed. All enemies and hostages in a single location where she could implement solutions that would be impossible against distributed targets. But the movement also created immediate danger for the hostages being transferred. As faculty members were forced to walk through corridors at gunpoint, Cass realized that any mistake during the transfer could result in executions that would end her rescue attempt before it truly began. She shadowed the movement from concealed positions, ready to intervene if any hostage was threatened during the consolidation. The tension was almost unbearable as she watched colleagues who had become friends over 5 years being pushed through hallways by armed operatives who showed no concern for their safety or dignity. When one of the younger faculty members stumbled and fell during the forced march, Cass nearly broke cover to intervene. Only her understanding that premature action would doom everyone prevented her from responding to the natural protective instincts that had driven her actions throughout the crisis. The emergency shelter area where Kozlov established his final position was a reinforced section of the school designed to protect occupants during natural disasters. Its concrete construction and limited access points made it nearly impregnable to conventional assault, but also created the contained environment that Cass needed for her own unconventional approach. Through careful reconnaissance, she identified the shelter's critical vulnerabilities: ventilation systems that connected to the building's central air handling, electrical conduits that could be accessed from maintenance areas, and communication lines that ran through spaces where she could introduce interference or monitoring equipment. Most importantly, she discovered that the shelter's emergency backup systems included components she could modify to create tactical advantages that Kozlov would never anticipate. The same features designed to protect occupants during emergencies could be adapted to create confusion, sensory disruption, and tactical opportunities. As evening approached and the crisis entered its 8th hour, Cass began implementing her final assault plan. Using techniques developed during hostage rescue operations in urban combat zones, She would create multiple simultaneous distractions that would force Kozlov's team to react to threats they couldn't identify or counter effectively. The first phase involved introducing carefully controlled amounts of harmless but disorienting gas into the shelter's ventilation system. The substance would create temporary confusion and reduced visibility without causing permanent harm to hostages, but would force the operatives to make tactical adjustments that would create opportunities for direct action. The second phase required her to establish direct communication with the hostages inside the shelter. Using the building's emergency communication system, she could provide instructions that would help them position themselves for maximum safety during the final assault. Faculty members in the emergency shelter, this is Cassandra Blackwood, she broadcast on the internal communication system. In approximately 10 minutes, I want everyone to move to the northeast corner of the room and remain as low as possible. Do not respond verbally to this message, but signal understanding by having someone cough twice. The response came immediately. 2 deliberate coughs that indicated her colleagues understood and were prepared to follow her instructions despite the extreme danger they faced. Through her monitoring equipment, she could hear Kozlov's increasing agitation as his team reported the strange chemical effects and communication interference that were beginning to affect their tactical position. Base team, we have unknown atmospheric contamination and communication disruption, came the confused report from one of his operatives. Maintain position and prepare for immediate assault from external forces. Kozlov responded, his voice carrying the strain of someone who realized his advantages were systematically being eliminated. Cass smiled grimly as she made final preparations for the direct assault phase of her operation. Kozlov was preparing for an attack from outside the shelter by conventional forces using standard tactics. He had no way of knowing that his opponent was already inside his defensive perimeter, preparing to implement solutions that existed outside the tactical manual. The Ghost of Kandahar was about to demonstrate why some operations required capabilities that could never be officially acknowledged or replicated. At 6:47 p.m., as the Colorado sun set behind the Rocky Mountains, Cassandra Blackwood made her final approach to the emergency shelter where Victor Kozlov and his remaining operatives held 43 hostages in what they believed was an impregnable position. The building's emergency lighting cast long shadows through corridors that had witnessed 12 hours of psychological warfare, tactical deception, and the systematic dismantling of a professional terrorist operation. Cass moved through the final access corridor with equipment that would have seemed impossible for a middle school teacher to possess: night vision optics, flashbang grenades modified for confined spaces, and weapons that had been hidden within the school's infrastructure for years. The transformation from educator to elite warrior was now complete, and the Ghost of Kandahar was about to end her longest mission. Through her final reconnaissance, she had identified the exact positions of Kozlov's 3 remaining operatives and mapped the locations where hostages were being held within the shelter. The disorienting gas she had introduced was creating the confusion she needed, while her communication with the trapped faculty had ensured they were positioned for maximum safety during the assault. Morrison, final assault commencing in 60 seconds. She whispered into her secure communicator. I need immediate extraction for 43 civilians and medical support for potential casualties. Cass, tactical teams are finally authorized and moving into position. You don't have to do this alone anymore. Negative. Kozlov's psychological profile indicates he'll execute hostages the moment he detects external assault. This has to be surgical, and it has to be now. She disconnected the communication link and activated the first phase of her assault. Using the building's emergency systems, she simultaneously triggered every alarm, sprinkler, and backup lighting system in the shelter area. The cacophony of sound and sudden changes in lighting created sensory overload that would temporarily disorient even trained operatives. In the same instant, she breached the shelter through an access panel that connected to the ventilation system, an entry point that Kozlov's team had considered impossible to use for assault purposes. Their mistake was assuming that conventional assault tactics were the only threat they faced. The first operative never saw her coming. Cass dropped from the ceiling directly behind his position, neutralizing him with pressure point techniques that rendered him unconscious before he could raise an alarm or threaten hostages. His weapon was secured and his radio disabled within seconds. The second operative, positioned near the shelter's main entrance, was confused by the alarms and searching for threats from the expected direction of external assault. Cass used his distraction to approach from his blind spot, employing the silent takedown techniques that had made her legendary during urban combat operations. Viktor Kozlov himself was the final and most dangerous target. The former Spetsnaz operative had positioned himself with a clear field of fire across the hostage area, holding Principal Stevens at gunpoint while maintaining command oversight of the entire shelter. His experience and tactical awareness made him far more dangerous than his subordinates. But Kozlov had made one critical error in his defensive planning. He had positioned himself to counter threats from the shelter's official entrances, not anticipating that his opponent would create new access points through building infrastructure. When Cass emerged from an emergency equipment panel directly behind his position, he had less than 2 seconds to react. The engagement was brief, but decisive. Kozlov's Special Forces training made him a formidable opponent, but 12 years of preparation had given Cass advantages he couldn't match. Her knowledge of the building's layout, her positioning of equipment and resources, and her understanding of his psychological profile all combined to create a tactical situation where his skills were neutralized by her superior preparation. The confrontation ended with Kozlov unconscious on the floor and his weapon secured, while Principal Stevens and the other hostages remained unharmed despite being in the direct line of potential fire. The precision required for such an engagement would have been impossible for anyone without the most elite level of special operations training. "Everyone remain calm and stay in position," Cass announced to the hostages as she secured the shelter area. "This is Cassandra Blackwood. The threat has been neutralized, and medical personnel are en route." The reaction from her colleagues was a mixture of shock, relief, and complete bewilderment. Teachers who had worked beside her for 5 years struggled to process what they had witnessed. The quiet history teacher who had graded papers in the faculty lounge had just executed a hostage rescue operation that seemed beyond the capabilities of most military units. Janet Morrison, still trembling from hours of captivity, stared at Cass with something approaching awe. "Who are you really?" Before Cass could respond, the shelter's main entrance burst open as official tactical teams finally arrived on scene. Commander Jake Morrison led the entry team, his expression mixing professional relief with personal concern as he surveyed the aftermath of his former teammates' one-woman war. "Building secure," Jake announced into his radio. "All hostiles neutralized, all hostages safe. We need immediate medical evaluation for 43 civilians and transport for captured personnel." As emergency medical personnel flooded into the shelter to evaluate the hostages, Jake approached Cass with the complicated expression of someone whose emotions were competing with operational responsibilities. 12 years, Cass. 12 years we thought you were dead, and you've been here teaching middle school?" "It seemed like a good cover identity," she replied, watching as her colleagues received medical attention while still trying to understand what had happened to their school and their perception of reality. "Cover identity for what? The war ended years ago." Cass gestured toward the unconscious form of Viktor Kozlov, who was being secured by tactical personnel. "The war never ended, Jake. It just moved to different battlefields. People like Kozlov don't stop operating because conflicts officially conclude. They adapt, evolve, and find new ways to threaten innocent people." As the immediate medical and security concerns were addressed, the scope of what had transpired began to sink in for everyone involved. A professional terrorist operation with international implications had been defeated by a single operator using resources and capabilities that officially didn't exist. David Chen and the other students Cass had trusted with emergency protocols were reunited with their families, though their understanding of their teacher had been permanently altered. Marcus Washington, who had shown leadership during the crisis, approached Cass as she prepared to leave with official personnel. "Ms. Blackwood, will you be coming back to teach us?" The question that every adult avoided asking was posed with the directness that only a child could manage. Cass knelt to Marcus's eye level, considering how to answer honestly without revealing classified information. "Your education will continue, Marcus. But sometimes teachers have to take on different responsibilities to protect the things that matter most. Remember what we discussed about leadership and courage. You proved today that you understand those lessons better than most adults." As she stood to leave, Principal Stevens approached with the complicated expression of someone whose world had been fundamentally altered by the day's events. "Cassandra, I hired you 5 years ago because your references and qualifications were exceptional. I never imagined that your qualifications included capabilities like this." "The qualifications were real, Robert. Teaching was never a cover story. It was a second career that meant everything to me. Protecting these students and this school was always my primary mission, whether anyone knew it or not. 3 weeks later, Jefferson Middle School had returned to normal operations with enhanced security measures and trauma counseling for everyone affected by the crisis. The official story described a terrorist incident that was resolved through coordinated law enforcement response, with no mention of the teacher whose actions had made survival possible. Cass's classroom, room 237, had a new occupant, a young teacher fresh from education school who brought enthusiasm and contemporary teaching methods to the same students who had learned lessons about courage that would never appear in any curriculum. The woman who had been Cassandra Blackwood was now serving in a classified position within a joint task force dedicated to identifying and neutralizing threats similar to the one that had endangered Jefferson Middle School. Her official title was meaningless, but her mission remained unchanged: protecting innocent people from dangers they would never see coming. On quiet evenings, she sometimes received letters from former students updating her on their progress and asking questions about history that went deeper than textbook answers. Each letter reminded her that teaching had never been about the job title or classroom location. It was about preparing young minds to understand a complex world and find the courage to make it better. The ghost of Kandahar had returned to active duty, but part of her would always remain in room 237, where a middle school teacher had discovered that some lessons could only be taught through actions that demonstrated the true meaning of service, sacrifice, and the absolute commitment to protecting those who depended on you. Some missions never ended. They just evolved into new forms of the same essential purpose, standing between innocent people and the darkness that would consume them if left unchallenged. And sometimes, the most important battles were fought not by soldiers in distant wars, but by teachers in suburban schools who understood that education and protection were two aspects of the same fundamental duty. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.